there are things in there that are extremely troubling, and we need to take action.
Mr. Trudeau, if you really want to help us in long-term care facilities, please increase your transfer in help to all provinces.
No province can do it alone. We need their support if we want to change the system, a broken system.
Calls for action from all levels of government this week after two back-to-back reports from the military exposed the situation in some long-term care homes in Ontario and in Quebec, a situation obviously only made worse by the COVID-19 crisis. So what kind of political response is needed to fix this problem? It's Thursday, and I'm here with At Issue, Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, and Althea Raj. Good to see everybody. Althea, good that you're back this week. We appreciate it. Technical problems have been surmounted. Obviously, this isn't the first time that we have heard about problems in long-term care, but it seems because of the pandemic, because perhaps it's the military that made these observations, political leaders are under some pressure. And I wonder whether this will change in a real way because of what we have seen and heard this week. You know what, I'll start with Althea because she didn't get a chance last week. Althea.
Well, I think a few things happened. One, there was outside accountability. So there was pressure for the federal government to say something and do something, and it fit in a narrative that Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister, had been talking about for weeks, frankly. And he has already said he's ready to do something about this. And so the fact that it emerged through the military, I think, is not that surprising. The fact that the premiers have been called to announce things in Ontario, we saw Premier Ford say he's taken over control of 5 homes with serious problems, 4 of which were flagged in the report. In Quebec, we had Premier Legault on Thursday say that he is basically offering more money for orderlies, for people to work in long-term care homes. Please, we're going to shorten the training. We're going to give you $50,000 a year. Please come join us. Take up this job. It's going to be very rewarding, and you can make more money. This speaks to long-standing problems that everybody was aware of, but I think the fact that you have a vulnerable population who mostly cannot speak up for themselves, I'm thinking about people, many of whom have dementia in long-term care homes, and workers who themselves feel vulnerable. A lot of new immigrants are working, women, sometimes sole providers in their family, are working in these homes. Precarious jobs, they don't pay much. They are usually part-time jobs because it's too expensive to have full-time employment. You had, it wasn't that we needed another report. It was that this one came with alarm bells, and the fact that there are 4,000 people that have died is really hard to ignore.
It came with alarm bells, Andrew, but it also came with a conversation around jurisdiction, which I understand for sure, but I wonder whether we can surmount the question of jurisdiction to get to actual solutions.
Probably not. We are in the pressure cooker of an immediate crisis right now with a lot of political heat. And while we absolutely need to fix this problem, problems of this nature are not going to be fixed overnight. So I would beware of quick solutions or instant analyses of this. And I would beware of one level of government deciding they're just going to do this on their own, particularly if it's the federal. They will run into resistance from the provinces. And as I say, not always. I mean, I'm one who has bashed the provinces on occasion in the past. But this is the kind of thing that is, by its nature, hard to run out of Ottawa. I can't imagine the feds would be too interested in micromanaging it, but they are going to have to get the provinces on board, and that will have to involve those long, tedious discussions that sometimes we yawn at.
Yeah, it doesn't seem as though the federal government wants to take it over. Even the conversation around the Canada Health Act, it doesn't sound to me, Chantal, like Ottawa is very inclined to go down that road.
No. For one, extremely difficult or resistance from the provinces. The fact is, Andrew is right, the provinces run the healthcare system, and it's not just a jurisdictional issue. They have the expertise to do so. Mm-hmm. So up to a point, if you want to improve the system, if you want, for instance, to make long-term care part of the umbrella of public health care, you need provinces to buy in, because that would be part of an integrated system, and they run the system. There is no way that the federal government can do this or arbitrarily bring it under the umbrella of the Medicare system. But the other issue for the federal government, if it wants to be a force for reform in this is at some point the Trudeau government is going to have to make a choice. Its big healthcare social policy initiative was supposed to be pharmacare. At this point, I'm not sure that public opinion or need is there rather than in long-term care. Yeah. And federal money is only going to have to be on the table to buy reforms. I don't believe you can move ahead with 4 or 5 reforms at the same time in the fiscal context that will be the fiscal context of the post-pandemic era.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, Althea. It doesn't mean that the federal government has to, shift some of its own priorities around where it was going to focus on healthcare.
I think it has continuously been knocked off of its the perceived course of action it thinks it's going to have at every election, and then whether it was Trump's election in 2015 or now COVID-19, I think it is having to readjust its priorities. So I agree. I think it's possible that national pharmacare kind of gets put on the back burner while the government looks at strengthening the welfare system, the social safety system, in different ways. I think the conversation over jurisdictional issues kind of has monopolized, I would say, like the media's questioning at press conferences. But instead of asking how he's going to get the provinces to agree, we, the media, have not really asked him how much money he's willing to put forward to fix the problem. And that's probably what we should be focusing on, because the provinces seem ready to move as long as Ottawa is ready to fork over the cash. Mm-hmm.
It could, I mean, they might be waiting to say, here's what we need, so that Ottawa doesn't over offer in terms of what they have in mind. But what kind of beyond the funding point of it, Andrew, what is the leadership play that Ottawa could have in this conversation? Or is that it?
I think it is mostly funding, and I think we want to be aware of this for a couple reasons. One is that we've been mentioning that they already have enormous burdens that they are taking on already, in many cases to bail out the provinces. Most of those, a lot of those, the programs that they've enacted are short-term things they can unwind once the crisis is passed. This is a more permanent thing. So if you're going to undertake that kind of additional expense, then you have to know, first of all, what you're going to do without to make room for it. And secondly, what exactly you think you're going to be contributing to it that is not contributed by the provinces. Whether more money is required or smarter regulation, for example, of these homes is another question. In Ontario's case, the inspectors apparently, stopped inspecting in-person inspections partway into the pandemic. That certainly didn't help. I'm not pointing any fingers at anybody, but that's one of those things you're going to want to try and address, particularly if we're looking at future pandemics. So It's not just a matter of money, it's also a matter of how these things are run.
Chantal.
But can we agree that beyond jurisdiction and federal, provincial, that the aging of the population has been a major policy issue that's been on the radar for a long, long time, and not based on some uncertain assumptions? And what we are seeing as a result of the pandemic, but that is not the main cause, is what happens when governments shovel forward structural demographic issues that have been looming. This isn't the pandemic happened, and how could we really foresee that it would at this time? This is something that has been coming down the pipeline for decades, and that every government, because its timeline, political timeline is 4 years, and this was a long-term issue. It's a bit like climate change. Oh, yes, it's big and it's real, but let's just, push it forward because that's not on the radar at this point.
Yeah. Okay.
And this is just a foretaste. This is a foretaste of bigger problems to come, because the aging of the population is going to continue, and there's a whole raft of issues that it raises that we've been avoiding, not just the long-term care issue.
We have an independent judicial system that has rendered a judgment without any political interference. Obviously, there are a number of further legal steps available to Ms. Meng that she will undoubtedly avail herself of, but the political side of our government has no interference in our judicial system, obviously.
Okay, that's just some of the reaction to the decision on the Meng Wanzhou court decision this week. That means that her extradition case can proceed. Obviously, it has highlighted yet again the tensions between Canada and China, and many people are already speculating that this is going to make things worse. Andrew, why don't I start with you? It's certainly not going to improve things, and it's particularly not going to improve things for the two Canadians who remain detained by the Chinese.
Yes, I mean, the Chinese have demonstrated throughout this affair that they delight in being the bully in this situation, that they perceive Canada, for whatever reason, as being bullyable, that they see us as the point of least resistance, if you will, in larger issues that they're facing. I guess the question that now comes is, how do we start to disabuse them of that idea? How do we start to make them realize that their bullying is not going to work? And I think this is the start of a much larger conversation that it goes far beyond the extradition issue into the question of Hong Kong, into the question of the Huawei and the 5G networks, that Canada needs to have a much stronger idea of how it wants to deal with China now that the old idea of comprehensive engagement is dead and buried. What is their approach going to be? How are they going to hook up with other countries and try and approach this in a multilateral fashion? There's broader strategic questions that this is now are really now in play.
Yeah, I mean, they went a little bit further on Hong Kong this week than they had in the past, jointly with other countries. But certainly the language around everything has been very careful. And lots of people, Chantal, have called on Canada to be more forceful. And Hong Kong, where there are so many Canadians living, you can see why that could present a window if it was the road this government wanted to go down.
I think this is a road that this government will have no choice going down on. When Justin Trudeau was in opposition, he used to talk about social acceptability and pipelines and the need for it. I believe through mostly the actions of China and the way it has handled a host of issues, Hong Kong, Huawei, the extradition issue, you can go down the list, the two Michaels, as kind of drained the well of social acceptability for federal government to want to engage with China in the short term at least. So that is where we're at, and I don't think at this point that the Liberals have any more crossings of the road to consider because they have no support for taking a road other than firming up their tone.
But obviously there is some hesitation around doing that, Althea, because of the potential, I imagine, economic repercussions is what is driving a lot of this.
And the future of Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig. We saw that with the Garretts, for example, who were held in a, you could say, similar fashion in the sense that there was a consular case. They were a consular case that was caused by an extradition request by the U.S. as well. And so I think the problem with the Trudeau government's response to China is that they weren't really sure how to respond. And they believed that a very cautious, don't rock the boat strategy was going to help ensure that Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig come back to Canada. And that is becoming less obvious. And so that's why we saw the Huawei decision being kicked down the road and kicked down the road and kicked down the road, and why we saw a very less aggressive action, even though there were people within the Liberal tent, but especially outside of the Liberal tent, urging the government to take a forceful stance, stop all the shipments that are coming in from China, inspect everything, apply some pressure. And we didn't see that happen. Now you're basically seeing criticisms on both sides. I'm not really sure the government knows what else it should be doing. It's being told that its strategy isn't working. Obviously, we know that. It's being told that taking an aggressive tone won't work either. So aside from reaching out through multilateral efforts, which is what we have seen, I don't know that they know what to do. In a way, though, we have an ambassador in China that is pro-China. François-Philippe Champagne, the foreign affairs minister, apparently has pretty decent relationships, and the door to communication is open. So I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not a China expert.
No, nor am I. And I think, go ahead, Chantal. Yeah.
But the thing is, the extradition issue has become a focal point in all this. And
Yes.
from everything you hear and you see, the judicial proceedings around that are going to drag on now beyond the U.S. elections, the presidential elections in the fall. And I'm assuming, and I'm out on a limb here, that there must be some hope somewhere in Canadian backrooms that maybe a change in presidency will change the tone of the conversation between the major players, which we have not been, the US and China. That may be wrong, that may be disillusioned, but you have to be realistic about the fact that the big players in this round do not include Canada.
Yeah, no, and I'll end with you on that, Andrew. And I think that that's an excellent point, because as a middle power, even if you stand up and speak aggressively and don't let yourself be bullied, what is the expectation of doing that, other than maybe to reassure your own population? I'm not sure what the payoff is.
Well, self-respect is one of them. Second of all is signaling to the Chinese that we will not be bullied into submission. That is part of their calculation, is that ultimately we will fold. And we have to, as I say, disabuse them of that idea. But ultimately, the only thing that's going to move China at all, if anything will, is coordinated international action across a wide range of fronts to tell them that not just in the matter of kidnapping other countries' citizens, but more broadly that their behavior is so far outside of international norms and cannot be tolerated any further. That's a much larger project, but that's what we're into. As I say, this is happening at the same time as a number of other events in which China is simply thumbing its nose at international law and human rights and basic common decency.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank
no,
you
That
all.
would be easier. That would be easier with a bridge builder in the White House.
Okay, I got to leave it there.
True
Good
enough.
conversation. Thank
True
you
enough.
all. Appreciate it. Thank you.